not least, we have the wonderful and the legendary person with an incredible background. We've got Tess, who is actually going to be the host for this talk. And she is going to be here to, talk about building synergy and revenue sharing in indie studios, and also just highlighting some really key practices as well. We're going to hopefully have some time toward the end of the event for questions. So at any point in time, So if at any point in time you can put your messages in the chat, but we'll make sure towards the end of the event that the questions get answered. So we're going to make sure that all of the content gets covered throughout the event, but at the end of the event, we'll take time for questions and all of that. But feel free to post them, but just know that towards the end of the event, that's when questions will be answered by Tess. So just letting you know about that. And also, Tess, if you wouldn't mind just posting that poll link that you put earlier, because it's probably got lost in some of the messages. Just as a heads up, Tess is going to be having some live polling in her presentation as well. It's got an interactive poll, so the link is right there, right in the description, right there. So feel free to click on that link and, interact. Yes, Rutuja, you can start the recording now. A few minutes ago, but yeah. Oh, okay, fantastic, great, beautiful. I just wasted my time flapping my chat. This is fantastic. Thank you. All right, well, without further ado, guys, sit back, get your popcorn, be nice and comfortable. Tess, the floor is now yours.
Oh man, all right, here we go, gang. Hi everyone, I'm Tess, and if you didn't catch that introduction, I'm an attorney, I work in games, and I have been helping out studios for a good long time now. I didn't always start as an attorney, I started as an artist, and I really wanted to work in a realm that would allow creatives to share their work and be legally protected for it. So thus my origin story and how we got all the way over here. I wanted to present today on the right of rev share, so thank you Cave Bear Games for giving me the opportunity to hold your very captive audience to attention. You guys should see the polling app within the chat. Oh, right. In case this title didn't land, we're also calling it Building Synergy. Revenue sharing in indie studios. Let's go ahead and test out this polling app. I'd love to get a feel for just who's in my audience, like who are you and what is it that you do in games? A couple of common answers here could be designer, programmer, writer, artist, musician. I'd love to see where the spread is. Hell yeah, game designer tracks for sure. Programmer exclamation point, yes. Studio founder, of course. Founder game design, Producer programmer. Wow, we've got I've rushed. We've got a good spread of people and titles and different things that you all are working on, and that makes sense for why you've been brought to Cave Bear and the network as a whole. Oh good, a QA! Narrative design, fun. And I can see from our word map, founder and game designer are going to be our biggest ones, which is great, you're in luck. This presentation is exactly for you. Okay, let us move on into the wild world of RevShare co-ops and what to do when there's no legal documentation. I've built this presentation so that we can kind of follow the path of a studio as they try and make these decisions, but let's talk about why RevShares fail for a moment. RevShares, when they aren't written down, aren't tantamount to much. You do have an agreement, but there's always going to be the issue where the vagueness is going to compound over time. When you start making money, people are going to start seeing the weak points of where things have not been resolved. And these assumptions are going to become very, very quickly a point of contention for you and your team. So let's meet our team. Oh, but first, This session is just going to be a framework for you guys to identify risk before the before revenue comes into the picture. I want this to be a pretty practical discussion based off of things that I've seen in the industry. What this session is not, it's not legal advice. I'm not your lawyer. This is for edutainment. This is for edutainment purposes only. And yeah, if you have a nuanced question that's not a hypothetical, please go ahead and consult an attorney before asking. That said, if you do have questions, we're going to save them for the end, but please feel free to post them in the chat so I can take a look at them. When I say hypothetical, I just mean say that it's your friend, so that I'm not giving you legal advice based off of your specific fact patterns. Okay, I'm legally obligated to say that, by the way, so thank you for hanging through the disclaimer. All right, so we've got 3 collaborators, 1 game, no written agreement. We're starting off with Aubrey, who's a programmer, Becca, who's an artist, and Chloe, who's a writer. Bonus points to people who can understand where I pulled these names from. I have them stratified across the globe, even though you might be working wholly in the United States. There might be a point in time where you're going to have to consider the international complexity of things. Okay, so Aubrey, Becca, and Chloe decide to collaborate on a game. None of them want to argue percentages before it gets started. And the agreement is basically, let's track the hours, we'll split revenue, and we're not going to argue about percentages until we know if there's money. So let's go to our first poll. Would you start a collaborative project this way? Curious to see where the spread lies. There's no correct answer here, although I suppose a competent attorney might have a preference. But I want to know genuinely if this is a way that you've started a collaborative project. Heck yeah, thank you. Thank you, option D. I see that you all are being very honest with me. Okay, a good spread. Yeah, this is the most common way that things actually get started. An informal Discord message, shot across the bow over LinkedIn, a text message in a group chat with friends. Often when we start projects, we aren't considering like, what's it going to take to put a legal contract into place? And honestly, when you're working with your friends, there's not a huge motivation to do so. So it's fairly typical for informal collaborative agreements to begin just offhand and without any documentation in place at all. But I want you to note something. You've already formed a legal relationship. When you agree to create something with each other and split the profits afterwards, you've created an obligation to split those profits afterwards. A contract doesn't even necessarily need to be written down. It could be exchanged verbally, or it could be a handshake, or you could just confirm through gesture. But in U.S. copyright law, when you agree to something like this, you form something what's called a joint work, meaning that all of you are the author, all of you have a bit of the ownership of whatever the resulting product is, and you're going to have to play by those same obligations that you set forth in whatever informal napkin agreement, Discord conversation that you set out at the beginning. All right, let's move on to the next scenario. We have a transparency problem. We're 6 months in, everybody's decided to track hours, they're going to split the profits. We have 400 hours accrued across the board. Aubrey has 400 hours in the game engine, Becca has 400 in the character art, Chloe has created 400 hours worth of dialogue. Well, I mean, like, she typed for 400 hours. Gameplay may differ. Aubrey raises a concern, and maybe some of you programmers or highly technical roles might raise the same. Hey, my work requires specialized knowledge. Building a game engine is way harder than creating art assets. Should all hours really be weighted equally? Okay, dig deep, chat, because I really want to know what your answer is. Again, there's no correct choice here. I'm just curious to see where the spread is. All hours should be equal. Yeah, okay. Not a lot of divergence on that yet. The team should negotiate case by case, taking the lead. Okay. Technical work deserves a higher rate. Interesting. Curious to see if anyone is going to pick C, any artists or visual creatives in the chat. How interesting. I'd love to know if you all have like dire reasons as to why you're choosing one or the other. I'd love to know in the chat itself so I can read it aloud. All hours should be equal is certainly the most egalitarian option here. Like, if people are going to be contributing hours in, then they'd expect some kind of contribution point out. The team should negotiate case by case is an interesting one. It also is the most complex one, right? Because you'd be considering like what each person does and how much that weighs into the project itself. Yeah, I can see the chat too kind of echoing this. It needs to be based on the need of the project. All works take their own specialty. Time does not equal quality. Interesting comment there, Alessandro. I would agree with you that maybe there is a vetting process here before the contribution split is actually determined. Every discipline requires lots of work and previous study to make great work. True, Josh, true. But we'll see these questions all the time, right? Maybe it's not even just segmented based on department. Maybe this is about how long someone has been in the industry. If someone's a 20-year industry vet, does that mean that their contribution should be weighed more heavily than someone who's just starting out? And these are all the kind of decisions that you're going to need to make when you're structuring this agreement. Yeah, thank you, Nikki. As someone who's both on the creative and technical side, it really depends on what you're doing, what the task and role, and how labor intensive it is, and sometimes how nice the role is. Like, VFX artist is a specialized role not many people do. Yeah, exactly. It could be based on niche, could be based on how many hours you spent in the industry, could be based on the technical complexity of the work. And all of that kind of does come into the determination of how is it going to be split up in the end. Note here, though, we've just created a compensation system. Because we're debating the relative value of what this work is worth, we've transformed it into an hour tracking compensation structure that's also weighted based on the technical abilities and maybe even the experience of the people who are participating. I do want to point out something here because it came out in a conversation with someone recently, and that was whether or not all of this should be visible publicly. And I don't really have this as a poll, although I think I might add it into the next iteration of this presentation. But what would you think, chat? Like if you were to expand this out and really put weights and values and priorities based on the type of work that's being created, would you issue this publicly to the entire group that's working on the project, or would it be on a contributor by contributor basis? Give you a moment to digest that. I don't want to give too much away here, but often, thank you, Billy. No, I would not make this info public. Or Josh, yes, I'm committed to transparency. Ayla weighing in, as a worker, transparency is so important, but as a boss, I don't think it should be me who makes it public. I think it should be up to the team to share if they want. Yes, public, yes to transparency. I see a lot of people are favoring a transparent communication style here, and that is the common consensus amongst people who come to me with this problem, saying that they do want it to be public because they don't want to hide anything from the contributors. But I want to challenge yourself to see how this might play out in a future scenario where maybe we've given Aubrey the lion's share because her work requires technical expertise. What does that do to the temperaments of the other contributors, Becca and Chloe, who are working in the same environment and are now having to gauge their level of effort against Aubrey? These kind of perceived inequities could drive the conflict between your team faster than the actual inequities could. So there is some value to keeping it private on the whole, but allowing the contributors to share this information if they wish to. Still, even when you're creating these kind of systems, if you are going to be weighting and prioritizing things, make it super, super apparent when they're signing that contributor agreement, that NDA, MSA, PSA, SOW, that this is how their pay is going to be calculated. Just so that if they do inevitably go share it with a coworker who's working on the same team as them, then they can at least feel assured that this isn't due to some kind of personality percentage as opposed to what the work is actually valued at by the studio. All right, we'll move on. That is a spicy topic though, so I'd love to take more questions on that if you have any. All right, let's talk about decision making for a moment. Aubrey wants to switch the game engine mid-development. She believes the current framework won't scale for the features they've planned. Becca disagrees. She's doing all the artwork, so an engine switch means that she's going to be redoing months of art integration. She doesn't want to do it, obviously. Chloe doesn't have a strong opinion on this as the writer. The writing can be ported one way or another, but both Aubrey and Becca are asking her to break the tie. So, who gets to decide, chat? We never really agreed on that. How should the team resolve creative disagreements? What do we think is the healthiest path? We have a majority vote on everything. A domain expert decides within their area, so Aubrey would decide programming, Becca would decide art, Chloe would decide writing. Whoever invests the most hours decides. This might be a great kind of Lord of the Flies way to determine it. If the person who works the most overtime is going to be the ultimate decision maker, I wouldn't recommend that option, but I think it's the funniest. Or appoint a lead with final authority. Someone says yes, someone says no, and their word is law. Could work for smaller teams. Could not work if those teams were deciding things outside of their domain. All right, let's read some of these comments. Ayla says, there has to be a hierarchy, in my opinion. I've come across teams that want to be equal, and I do not think it works. Okay. Serena has a comment. It depends on what the intention of the transparency is. Oh, wait, that's regarding the last one. Agreement that there has to be hierarchy. Fuzzy weighs in with engine decisions should go to the coders. Okay. Florian says, I think it should be based on responsibility versus investment. Nathan, yes, I agree. Lightsaber duel, winner is the boss. That should be the decision outcome every time. Honestly, you could certainly structure an agreement to require a lightsaber duel, but we might come into conflict with accessibility laws. But maybe lightsaber duel could be creatively defined in any way you could hold said lightsaber. Okay, nice split there. Interesting that the other two didn't get options. Honestly, I bring this one up because decision-making authority ultimately is one of the major pitfalls with co-op agreements. When you come in and everyone owns a piece of the business, then all of a sudden everything is subject to a vote. Where the art direction is headed, whether or not you can license this thing, when the publication date is going to happen, who you can involve in voice actors, and that kind of decision-making when spread across so many people, when it is recurrent and it has to happen for every single decision, can often grind things to a halt, right? If you're in a fast-moving development cycle and you have a deadline to meet, then you really can't wait for the council to determine what shade of blue you're going to go with for the launch. Simultaneously, the traditional structure where authority is concentrated into just one person is great, but it can risk alienating your contributors, right? If someone has specialty or expertise in a given area or topic, then you want them to be able to weigh in without fearing that they're going to be overruled. And that's where we can kind of see like these egoic cult of personality studios arise when it's the vision of one creative director and one creative director only. It makes things difficult to actually kind of see through because you're relying on someone's imperfect decision-making skills. I like that the chat gravitated towards specialized decision-making authority. I think that's why we see people like team leads kind of emerge departmentally, so that you can make decisions for the group as a whole, but you're not subject to making decisions for the game as a whole. And if there's a way for all of those leads to meet and decide together on things that are most critical and most important, and of course those need to be defined, then that tends to be the best outcome for everyone. Nikki, I have a hierarchy chart that shows rank role and even explains who their direct contact is, so if it's not role is equal, all roles are respected. Hell yeah, Nikki. That's a great way of going about it. Yeah, and it's not necessarily about shutting down people's opinions, because certainly people can have opinions without having decision-making authority, right? It's just about picking a person or team of people to make decisions so that it doesn't get bogged down by process. Okay. We're getting to the fun international part of this. It's month 8, and a publisher is showing interest in the game. The due diligence questions start arriving, but the most important one is this one. Can you confirm that you own all the IP in this game? Let's review. Becca created all the art from Berlin. Chloe wrote all the dialogue from Leon. Neither of them signed anything assigning their work to the project. Hold in the back of your mind, does location matter, while you answer this question. Does the studio own Becca's art even without a written agreement? Yeah, she contributed to a joint project. Or, nah, she retains her own IP. Or, C, it depends on the country. Or D, I honestly don't know. I believe this one does have a correct answer. We have a couple of complexities here, right? There is no written agreement, but there is an agreement to work on a project together. We know that means joint IP, so it could extend to the other partners by proxy of it being incorporated into the bigger project. All right, we got our 19 responses in. Let's show correctness. It depends on the country. Congratulations, the 11% of you who answered that correctly. It does depend on the country, even if. Oh yeah, get that right answer in while you still can. even if there is a work for hire signed, even if there is an assignment contract drafted, and in that example there wasn't, but let's just say there was, a work for hire isn't universal. In the United States, a work for hire applies to some narrow circumstances. If you're doing it within the scope of your employment, or if it's within those kind of specific statutory categories of written agreements. If these contributors are international, like Germany or France, which our two hypo contributors are, then it doesn't automatically vest, even if it says work for hire on the assignment agreement that was exchanged between the parties. These countries don't necessarily acknowledge it, and in order to get this to be foolproof, to have your studio own the IP ultimately, you have to have that assignment in language that those jurisdictions can respect. That one's spooky. Let me know if this is something that you've encountered. All right, let's move on though. Month 10, there's an unexpected offer on the horizon. A different publisher approaches Becca directly. They want to license her art assets for a completely different game. Good money, immediate payment. They want the sprites, they want the color scheme, they want the animations. Becca asks the team, do I even need your permission to do this? And Aubrey is going to do what an Aubrey do and say, of course you do. That's our game's art. It belongs to our game. It's part of the joint work. Chloe's not so sure. What do we think, chat? Makes me curious about whether the government locally in your area may view this as a possible misclassification around employment, creating potential legal hurdles to have to contend with later on, owed back pay. Oh, interesting. Would it ultimately fail in the jurisdiction if it's not incorporated? What if everyone is in different countries? Yeah. The same thing goes for the employment agreements. You can certainly create an employee agreement, but you would have to be subject to all of the various jurisdictions that those employees would come from. Can Becca license her art separately? She got an independent offer from someone looking to leverage her art. No, she needs permission from everyone. Yes, it's her art. She can license it, but must share proceeds, or she could license the entire game. All right, there is a correct answer here. I'm gonna give it another minute so that we can get a couple more respondents in before I click the correct answer. Although I suppose you all can just come glom the correct answer once it's unveiled. She could license the entire game, chat. She could actually license her art separately, too. So technically B is correct as well. It's just not the most correct. I'm sorry to do that to you. I just, after years of legal education, I'm forced to create questions that are needlessly cruel. She does not need permission from everyone. The joint work assignment here means that she can release her own art. She can release the entire game. The only throttle here is that she has to pay that rev share to all the other participating contributors. In the joint work methodology, everybody is an owner of the whole thing, not just the pieces that they contributed into it. Once you say, yes, I agree to make a game together, then everybody can license out that game if nothing else is specified. Also, let's take this for a moment. Revenue share is just going to be concerning about the amount of money that is owed after you start making revenue, right? It doesn't guide ownership. If you say that it's a 30-30-30 split with percentages, if it's a 30-30-30 split, then that doesn't apply to it being 30-30-30 ownership. Everybody has 100% ownership. They're just entitled to 30% of the proceeds once it goes public. Let's see some of the spirals in chat. Alessandro comes back with a justified what? How? Because that's how joint work works. Ayla says contracts, 100%. That's why I'm here, to tell you the value of the written word. Luke has a question. Can we ship a game with content made by people that are no longer on the team? Yes, the joint work would allow you, as a joint owner of that work, to ship the entire game without the consent of people on that team. So long as those people who are no longer on the team are getting paid whatever percentage they were promised in the beginning. And if nothing was promised, then that's not even an obligation either. All right. We've got an exit problem now. Chloe gets a job offer month 12. We're a year into this project. She's contributed 600 hours of dialogue work over the past year. The game won't launch for another 18 months. Oh, nice in before exit too, Luke. Good job. It's like you knew what I was going to be talking about. She takes a full-time position. She can't continue with the project, and the team is happy for her, but they're also stuck. No one ever discussed what happens when someone leaves before launch. So, chat, let's consider. Does her contribution entitle her to revenue forever? Can Aubrey and Becca buy her out? At what price? And what about the dialogue concept she's developed? What should happen to Chloe's revenue share when she leaves? Is the biggest question that I want you to ask yourself. She keeps everything she's earned. Okay. Assuming that you earn it over time and it's not just 30% forever. Shares should be forfeited if you leave. Team should have the option to buy her out. Interesting, yeah. Buy her out would imply that we have some kind of money to spend. So we would need to consider when that buyout could happen and how it would be calculated and for how long. And then depends on why she's leaving. A very practical, grounded answer. Okay, we're at 16. I think if we get one more response, then I'll show the correct one. All right. That's fine. We don't need another correct response. Here, have a freebie. So, all of these are different ways to structure it. Yes. They each have a different risk, right? If she keeps everything she's earned, that's great. But if it's 30% of everything forever, how long does that go on for? If the shares are forfeited if she leaves, then that is how the industry typically works. If you're on a project and you leave, then those shares are forfeit after you exit the project. Maybe there are certain milestones that you can put in there in any kind of agreement, saying like if you make it to the vertical slice, if you make it to a demo, if you make it to publication, then you can maintain the shares that have vested within you. And vesting here just means that they're yours permanently. If the team buys her out, we have to consider those other things that we talked about before. What is the value of her shares worth before you start making money? And does it purchase all of the shares that she could ever make potentially on the project? Chloe might want to push back on that, right? If that value is too low. You might want to get a lawyer involved to say that this was a joint work. Nothing was ever written or set down in stone. So I'm actually entitled to the whole 30% forever. The best, most comprehensive answer here is that it depends on why she's leaving. If this is a contentious termination, like Chloe is leaving, taking all of her work with her, deleting it from the server afterwards, bad-mouthing the team on social media, then maybe this is a moment where those shares should be forfeited, right? She's going out of her way to become a problem for the team. Most casual arrangements, though, won't even address this issue when someone leaves. This is a governance question, right? You're going to have to decide when they can keep their shares or lose them, how the buyout works, what obligations kind of continue after someone's gone, and who gets to call it a bad departure. Remember when we had those decision makers that we had set up? Is that the person who determines whether or not someone's termination is on bad terms? Or is it something that's spelled out within the contributor agreement itself? All things that you really should take a look at before finalizing that agreement. Let's check the chat. Alessandro, is the joint work trap situation automatic also in Europe, or is it something more US related? I would love to dispositively respond to how Europe handles this. The way I'm going to phrase it is that, whilst I would love to do more research, joint work is a common thread across all copyright law, and it's something that would extend to Europe in some form or fashion. Wouldn't a clause agreement have to be drafted, Nikki asks, in case they leave, in case of a scenario? I know someone will compensate up till after they leave based on the work they contributed. Really depends on the agreement, which I always say to make sure legal covers in almost any scenario. Yeah, exactly. There is most agreements are going to be the ones that, most agreement terms are going to be where you find how this is dispositively handled, which is why I want you to start thinking about how you would handle it in your current work structure, right? What seems fair to you? Because the standard currently is that you enter into agreement with studio, you work until it's finished, and if you don't work until it's finished, then those shares are clawed back, they're returned back to the pool. There are certainly ways that you can manufacture a vesting schedule so that it accrues points as you're working on something. Like, say, every 100 hours gets you 5% of the revenue share, right? And continues upwards from that. But even so, that can be a little generous when it comes to determining like the platform distribution fees or any other expenses that you might incur making the game itself. Yeah, that's correct. Condition 0. It's my understanding that the equity cliff investing is considered the traditional way to handle this problem. Does that track with my experience? Yeah, exactly, precisely. Setting up stages for when people can earn their shares is certainly the easiest way to ensure that those things are vested and not up for dispute once they leave. Okay, let's talk about this formalization point. We're over a year into making this game. We still don't have an agreement or a business formed. What started as a casual arrangement has become a compensation system. The compensation system has revealed governance problems, and the problems aren't going away on their own. Aubrey, Becca, Chloe, they all sit down to figure out what kind of structure they actually need. So, do they form a company, write up an agreement, keep trusting each other, and hope nothing goes wrong? Each options have trade-offs, and for the first time, we're talking about this as a business. What do you think, chat? Form an LLC for the legal protection, taking the lead, all right? Written agreement without entity formation. Keep it informal. We trust each other, or get a lawyer involved. I'm going to admit to some professional bias here. If that helps you determine what the correct answer is to this one. Now, an LLC certainly will help formalize your business into an actual business. It's not necessarily going to assist with the ownership and revenue share split. We can have a written agreement without entity formation. That is fine. Technically, you don't really need an LLC, although it does help silo the decision maker and point an entity for an investor to engage with. So it's a nice way to formalize the operations while simultaneously shoring up your contributor goals. I'm so happy that none of you chose keep it informal. Oh, and I didn't set a correct answer? Here's the correct answer. Get a lawyer involved. You should really get a lawyer involved. You could draft this yourself, certainly. You could use ChatGPT Esquire if you're risky. But getting a lawyer involved will certainly help because you need both IP assignment and revenue allocation. Forming an LLC doesn't answer those questions for you. When you go to register an LLC, you're effectively saying, we're a company, we do business in state or country. These are the people included in the company. It doesn't talk about who owns the work. It doesn't talk about what the splits are. It doesn't talk about what happens at the end of someone's tenure at the studio, right? What we need is a well-drafted agreement to achieve the same clarity as entity formation that answers the questions of who owns it and who gets paid. Thanks, Fuzzy. Keep trusting each other, hope nothing goes wrong, because nothing ever goes wrong. Thank you for saying that informally, even though you didn't vote on it. We'll take that as your actual opinion. Okay. All right. This is where I soft launch my own thing. I've created a quick template website called clausecodex.com, and I've developed a right of revenue sharing for you all to work through the preparatory framework, so you can kind of figure out what your contract is going to look like. It is not a contract. It's not legal advice. It is just a checklist for you and the other founders in your studio to go through and make sure that you're all on the same page. Once that's done, take that understanding to your lawyer, or take it to someone who's lawyer adjacent or something. Take it to someone who knows what they're talking about so that they can get an idea of what kind of business that you want to develop so that you can have exactly what terms you want to agree to in there. Feel free to get it there. That's the link to the website. That's a basic aspect of how it looks. I've got a couple of other things there for studios as well, but I just think it's useful to have anything, literally anything, written down and handed out between you and whomever you're building this project with, so you can all get on the same page as to who's doing what, who's earning what, and what's happening. All right, and we have time for questions, I believe. Oh yeah, we got like 20 minutes for questions. Y'all, we went through that so fast. Oh gosh.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. You actually went through that lightning speed. So thank you so much. Let's just give Tess a virtual round of applause.
I need the validation, please, guys.
Yes. Please give her a virtual round of applause. You're getting an actual round of applause from me, just saying.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Just saying, yeah. Your presentation was absolutely sick. I don't know about y'all, but I was like locked in the whole time. Like I was supposed to be doing some work, but like I was like locked in the whole time. No, I think the presentation was absolutely fantastic. You got everybody really well engaged. But yeah, so I think it was a lot of great information. And yes, we do have time for questions. So I do see a question where I was pinged. Yes, for sure. Give me 1 second. I'll get you to jump in and be a speaker real quick, okay? All right, so we have somebody coming on up to just ask their question. Feel free to type your questions out in the chat as you'd like. Give me a second. We're just going to get this question to be asked live. Go ahead. You should be able to jump in now. Hello. Welcome on in. Feel free to go ahead and ask your question.
So this is a potentially hardball question, a challenge question. Basically, you have a choice between company equity and revenue shares, and you want to bring on potentially someone that could be star talent. They, increase the pedigree of your studio. How do you make the decision between which category you should provide to these people? Let's say that they're a veteran of the industry, 10 plus years, 15 years, they're technical director, what have you. What has been your experience where you're trying to make that decision, advise legally on what the best placement is for someone in those scenarios? A bit off the traditional path, I imagine, for this question.
Yeah, in my experience, splitting up equity is always company equity, as in you're the owner of the studio. So you're splitting up ownership instead of the profit share. I tend to advise people not to split up the ownership unnecessarily. You can certainly do so in a sufficient structure where you have that kind of authority and decision making laid out for who's going to be the deciding factor on anything. But when you split up the ownership in so many fragments, you're encountering that same co-op problem that we kind of glossed over through the presentation, which was when you have too many cooks in the kitchen. Right now, everybody has a stake in every single decision that has to be made. Now, of course, you can give voting shares and non-voting shares to people who are owners or participating within that kind of structure. It's something that you would need to make that kind of determination in based on how much you're going to contribute to those kind of processes. Does that make sense?
It does, thank you. And also, really love the interactive part of your presentation. I wish more presentations would do that. It makes it so much more engaging for everyone involved, so I love to see it. Just wanted to say this.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
I'm gonna have to definitely steal some of your tactics, just saying, because it was really good. Thank you so much for jumping on here, Fitzgerald. I hope your questions have been answered. If you do have any other questions at any point in time, feel free to shoot us a message at any point, okay? All right, you take good care of yourself, okay? Have a good one. All right, I see a lot of questions in the chat. I'm catching up. Don't worry, I promise they will all be answered. All right, so from Florian, instead of shares, what about just splitting the income based on everyone's number of hours worked, possibly scaled by their expertise level?
When you say income, this is future looking, I imagine. This is still technically a rev share, right? Because it's a share of the revenue that you're receiving. And I saw a similar question here, like what's the difference between a rev share and a profit share? Technically the same. We didn't get into the nitty gritty of exclusions to what's considered revenue, right? You may have heard the words gross and net revenue before. And when we're thinking about like what gross revenue is, that's effectively the entire pie, right? Not considering the expenses and costs that have gone into creating that revenue. I would say that the issue with splitting it by the hours worked is exactly what we had kind of talked about in the first part of this presentation, that there is this kind of competitive drive between contributors, which is going to have them evaluating the value of their work against each other. We discussed like what some of those determinations could be, like is it the extent that they've been in the industry? Is it their expertise and specialty in the field? Is it the sheer effort of their labor? Right? And certainly the most egalitarian to go with an hourly split, although it might still produce the same problems, right? People comparing their work to others. So if you are going to weigh it and base a priority to it, or maybe even have it vest based off of how many hours they have contributed, that's certainly a way to split it. It just has to be just make sure that it's transparent to the people who are opting into it, that you have the ability to change it later if you need to, and that, no one is necessarily penalized for comparing their own work against each other. Hope that answered your question.
Florian, you can just confirm in the chat if that answered your question, and if not, then I'll make sure to get back to your follow-up, okay? In the meantime, I'll jump over to another question real quick. Let me see. All right, here we go. Okay, so from Alessandro, next question. So after a year of volunteer work, let's say you get a lawyer involved and draft an agreement. How do you deal with team members that left the project?
Yes. Okay, so what we're considering here is that maybe these team members had this rev share expectation, they've left the project, but you still want to use their assets, right? So there's a couple of ways to go about that. You'd want to first figure out where they're located jurisdictionally. If they're an international contributor, this advice may change. But all of it is going to kind of center around an assignment agreement and a retroactive one at that. They created work based on date, you're developing game, you want to incorporate work, and for that, you need them to perpetually assign the work to your company, meaning that they no longer own it, they no longer have a claim over it, and there's even a morality clause that we like to include there that says that if you change it, they can't say you can't change it. That one's interesting because if you consider, I don't know. I always like to use a mustache example. I drew a picture of Queen Elizabeth and I wanted the fidelity of her image to make it through to the game, but someone somewhere decides it'd be really funny if we just put a mustache on everyone, including Queen Elizabeth. As the artist, without that kind of morality term in there that you would have signed to and waived, then you artists could say, hey, you're changing the basic integrity of my artwork, and I don't want you to do that. You can still maintain those rights even if you do a proper assignment. So it's important that both are in there so that you can make sure that you have the ability to own it forever, commercialize it, and change it if you need to.
Perfect.
That should have answered your question, but let me know if it didn't.
For sure, and I think they just added a follow-up really quick. Can they just remove their work?
Yeah, you could certainly just remove their work. If you remove their work, then you're not commercializing it and you're not incorporating it into anything. If you do remove it, though, and there's still this kind of expectation that they're going to get paid some percentage of it, it'd be in your interest to send them a letter clarifying that you're not using their work and they're not going to be receiving that percentage that was previously agreed upon. You can terminate an agreement at any time, but you typically need to do that in writing just so that all parties are aware. And in case a lawyer gets involved, they can look at that and be like, no, we definitely settled this.
Perfect. So, Alessandra, you can just confirm in the chat if that answered your question. If not, feel free to post a follow-up as well, and I'll try my best to get to it. Okay, next question that we've got rolling along here. Perfect, Alessandra, you're very, very welcome. If you have any other questions, like I said earlier, feel free to message any one of us at any point in time. We'll be happy to help. Moving on to the next question down the list. We're making good progress. Let's keep it rolling. All right, so we've got a question from Billy. So can an engagement force someone to forfeit shares if they're terminated or leave?
Yeah, this is typically called a clawback, and it'll be in the contributor agreement that you have them sign ultimately at the beginning. So the MSA, the Master Service Agreement, PSA is a professional service agreement, or even just a contractor agreement, right? That would set out the terms for what happens to those shares when they leave. Sometimes you could be draconian about it, right? And say if they leave the project before you publish, then that's it. They don't get a percentage of their shares. Their work gets added into the pool. They sign off a waiver saying that they've assigned their rights and you can change it and commercialize it. And that's that. It's a sticky situation, right? Because it doesn't feel good, but think about it in ways of tiering it as a vesting structure, right? If they were to stay on for the first year of the project, they earn some percentage. If they were to stay on for a second, that they earn some percentage, and that they generally get to keep that. You could also put a tail in terms of years to the end of the agreement. Because let's say that someone's no longer on the project, but they have 10% vested in their revenue split, and they're going to make 10% of the game once the game is released. Think about how long that's going to continue for, right? How long would you want someone who's no longer on the project taking a cut of that split? Maybe this expires after 5 years, 10 years, 3 years. A typical video game tail is going to peak in the first 1 to 2 years, right? So it's not necessarily the best course of action to keep them on and taking a share for the perpetuity of that life cycle.
For sure. Awesome. Just confirm in the chat as well if that answered your question, Billy. And if not, feel free to post your follow-up. And again, I'll try to get back to it. But thank you so much for answering that. And moving on to Nathan. So he says, I don't know if this is a different topic, but I'm wondering, what do we need to look out for when we want to avoid rev share contributors to be reclassified as employees?
Ooh, such a good question. This could be easily its own topic. When we're looking at whether or not there's an employer and employee relationship, we're typically looking at a couple of indicators. Did the employer have the ability to manage how that work got done? Did the employer provide all of the resources and tools that are within that employee's job description to get that thing done? Typically, especially in the remote nature of the indie game studio space, it's going to be difficult to characterize someone as an employee unless you provided them a laptop or set out their entire day. If you're asking people to kind of work at their own pace and consider their own methods for how they're getting the project done, you can still ride that contractor line, although it is a fine one, right? Are they required to clock in every day? Do they have to submit PTO requests? Are there holidays that you pay people to take, and are you paying for their health insurance, right? Every step that you take that an employer would make for its employees gets you closer to that designation. It's a balancing test. So there's no like real black and white boundary line between what is a contractor and what's an employee. A court and a judge is going to be deciding that fact, but you can generally stay away from being classified as an employer if you aren't providing things like healthcare, PTO, if you're not doing all of the above. Hope that helped.
Awesome. Nathan, just confirm in chat if that. Oh, perfect. Fantastic. Beat me to it. Thank you so much. All right, moving along here. Jesse, if you're still in the chat, yes, I can have you jump in to expand upon your question via voice. But I'll give Tess the context first, and then I'll invite you to speak to add a little bit more clarity before she answers. So, Tess, here's the context. So, is there a typical framework for profit sharing rather than revenue sharing? And he's going to expand on this momentarily. I'm going to be inviting you to speak right now, but that's just the surface level. And then when he comes into the chat, he can feel free to expand. Just as I say it, hey Jesse, feel free to come on in and expand a little bit more on your question if you'd like.
Hey, thank you. I don't want to take up too much time. I mean, basically, what I'm trying to understand is, you never know whether or not your product is going to be successful. And, whenever you're getting people to work on something, it doesn't matter how much people believe in it. Matters is how it ends up, what the results are. And so I think that, what I'm trying to understand is it's like, all of the costs accrued to the point of your game's launch still need to be paid for. You know what I mean? Like all of everything that you are paying for up until then, that needs to be, I guess that's where it's like after profit, because
Right.
profit is considering those costs, right? But what my interpretation of revenue share is like, okay, every single dollar that gets made is being split, X amount of ways, right? Based on the the percentage that's agreed upon or whatever, So and trying to figure out a quality of work or amount of tasks completed, I know that there's a lot that goes into it, but I guess that's just my general question is, how do you author an agreement to consider these kinds of costs? And I know that probably has something to do with communicating to people that this is a risk, initially, but yeah, anyway.
Yeah. No, a great distinction, because I don't even think we got to this in the slides. Although I did talk about gross v net a little bit. So gross revenue is the entire pie, right? Net is what is earned after costs are factored in. And when we're thinking about profit would be that kind of net consideration. And normally, if you're just setting down a 30-30-30 split, that's not really answering the question of what happens to all those costs. And there are a couple ways that you can go about it, right? Like the studio could absorb all those costs. Not ideal, because then the studio's cut is getting further cut, or it could be passed on to the contributors, right? Like that's deducted from whatever the rev share split is proportionally. Or even, and I've seen this authored most likely in the rev share splits themselves, is that you only do the split on the net revenue, not on the gross. Right? So that all of those costs come out, they're repaid, they're reimbursed to studio once you start making money, and then the split happens on the remainder of that pool. I think that's the best way to do it, because then nobody's share is really getting deducted after the fact, and you have the ability as studio to recoup those expenses before you start paying out. As much as we want to share the gross of it, it becomes untenable, right? When you have to pay to even just get the game out the door. I hope that helped.
It did. Thank you.
Cool.
You're very welcome. Take care. If you do have any other follow-up questions, put them in the chat and we'll hopefully be able to get back to it. But if we're not able to get back to it, then feel free to message us after the event is over.
That's Michael.
All right. I'm just getting through right now. Perfect. All right. So next question. Okay. So from Nikki, So, if relevant, how do you find a lawyer for your studio, especially if you're indie? Because the ones I've seen usually worry about the cost. Because I want to find I want to find someone legal that understands handling indies, since I want to make sure they handle IP and agreements.
Yeah. There are, okay, so I mean, shameless self promotion. Hi, I'm a lawyer. I have a law firm. Feel free to call me. There are also other great law firms within this industry. I go by Cause and Effect, and you can, causeandeffect.com is a website that I have, so feel free to check that out. But there are other great law firms in this industry too that are used to helping out indies. I do echo that financial concern though, right? Because most lawyers are going to be somewhere around $450 an hour, and there's a lot that you could do with that amount of money. I don't doubt that at all. There are a few template shops that are rising up, which are disconnected from law firms. And while that isn't legal counsel, I do think that it's a way to get a lot of quick information and certainly have an agreement set forth between you and everyone so that you can start adjusting it and modifying it. So that way, when you do go to an attorney, inevitably, you'll have an agreement in hand that has the basic premise of what you all can agree to, and that attorney is only doing a fraction of the work as opposed to drafting it whole cloth. Some attorneys understand the indie plight, though, right? And most consultations are free. So I'd encourage you to go onto the law firm's website, book a consultation, see what they can do for you rate-wise. Because if it's not a discount for indies, then they might be able to offer you something like a flat rate or a fixed rate, meaning that they can give you a combination of documents. The ones that you're likely going to need for any studio with your contributors is going to be that MSA SOW combo and an NDA before you start talking to people. So ask them how much that triplet of documents would cost for them to draft as a package, and see if you can't get something within your budget. A good price is typically around $600, so I would try to budget for that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Nikki, if you could just confirm that answered your question. Perfect. Moving on to the next question that I have here is from Karen. So if you don't split ownership of the studio but do of the project, if one person has ownership, would the others be contractors?
Let's see. Do you repeat that again? I'm trying to get a grasp of them.
So if you don't split ownership of the studio, so let's just say it's a shared owned studio from my understanding of the question, but you do split ownership of the project. If one person has ownership of the project, would the others be considered contractors? Based on what I'm understanding from the question.
Yeah, plus there's also the tricky subject of if you create a new project, does ownership convey to the other members? I would say here, Karen, that ownership would vest solely in that one person who owns the studio, and then everyone else would be contractors. Now, there's certainly ways that they don't have to be contractors, right? Like these could be employees of the company as opposed to like people who are just coming in to work on a project, and that structuring might give a little more authority and ownership to the people who initially founded the company. Because in my mind, I'm thinking like our Aubrey, Becca, Chloe scenario, where maybe Aubrey owns a studio, but Becca and Chloe can come in as executive directors or as part of the C-suite team and help operationalize it from an employee standpoint, even if what they're getting paid in is a revenue share. So not necessarily contractors, but sometimes, maybe, if it's not defined otherwise.
Perfect. Okay. Hopefully that answered your question, Karen. Moving on to the next one that I have here from Smashy. If you're working with folks in multiple different countries, what country is used for enforcing the contract? Good governing law question, Smashy. The country used to enforce the contract is going to be the one that's on the agreement. You can typically define this, and most people do it as their home turf, right? And when you work with international contributors, you might want to find something more neutral. Like, let's just say your studio's in Alabama, they're in London. You might want to pick New York as your kind of neutral venue because it's the halfway point. And New York courts are typically used to dealing with international disputes. So a lot of agreements tend to have their governing law set there just because it's easier for everyone to get to. But it greatly depends what's in the contract terms itself. Awesome. Okay, perfect. So just got that one checked off. Perfect. So just jumping into the next one here. So from Afaf, hopefully I'm not butchering this name. This one's a loaded question, so be ready. So by splitting the ownership of project, how would the incorporated studio handle IP? I mean, the publishers like have to have a clean IP structure, often with studio owners only. What if an investor is interested in putting in money, but only posts a vertical slice, which might take less, let's say about 6 months? And what type of contract should be done among the contributors then?
So the way I typically advise my studio clients is to have the IP point back to the LLC that you create, right? It's so much easier to have your LLC function as your IP library of sorts because the LLC can be bought and sold too. It's its own asset, right? Even if someone is an owner of said LLC, that entire company can then go be purchased by a big publisher, right? Who can do what they want with it later on. If it is solely vested in the LLC, then the IP registration is a little bit easier. You don't, for example, have to split out all of the independent co-owners of the work, right? It would just be pointing back to one entity. Now, there are still times where you might want to split out the authors for accreditation and things of that nature, but that would come more granularly based off of the type of IP that you're registering. As opposed to registering the game in its entirety, now it's just pointing to one person. Again, different ways to skin a cat. That's my preferred method.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Hopefully that answered your question. I do see, I think there's one more here. Okay, perfect. So again, from condition 0. So this one is more so related to like a wording question. So just as a heads up. So does the terminology you use when discussing the efforts by volunteers on your project matter for the purposes of classification of employee by a state or federal government body? For example, calling them a team member versus a volunteer contributor in your online messages back and forth.
It can. It certainly can. I don't think that... Team member might get murky, right? Because you're implying that they're part of a team, but a team doesn't necessarily mean an employment relationship. A volunteer contributor can be equally murky, right? Because a volunteer might imply that they're not getting paid for it. Terminology will matter more when it looks like you are acting like an employer, or let's see, efforts of volunteers on your project. For classification of employees, yeah. If you're doing all the steps that makes it look like you're acting as an employer, see above, controlling work hours, controlling work medium, controlling clock in, clock out, then the terminology matters more. If you say, look who's part of our team, and that doesn't deviate from how you've hired other employees, like a judge could infer that to mean that this is someone who's part of your employment circle of people. So terminology matters to an extent that it corroborates the assumption that you are acting as an employer for these folks. Sorry, that's a greatly depends kind of answer. I don't like giving those, but unfortunately it is what it is.
For sure. And actually he posted an example earlier, which is just kind of like a follow-up from this question. So his example is you call someone a team member for a year's worth of volunteering, and the state you're developing in says you owe back pay for the entire year because you misclassified them, and they were actually doing work that would make them be considered an employee of your volunteer studio.
It's not unheard of, but this is also why we would want to have that kind of agreement already solidified, saying that you're a contractor, not an employee, so that these kind of determinations can dispositively point to an understanding between you and that contributor.
Perfect. Hopefully that answered your question, by the way, condition 0. Just confirm if it did. But yes, I think I saw one more here. There it is. Again, from condition 0 still. Just another question. If a volunteer uses student software to build the game, it potentially risks poisoning the commercial viability of the project. How would you recommend protecting the studio's commercial viability under a circumstance of that sort?
Ooh, interesting, because this kind of gets into the open source questions too. Another presentation for another time, I think. But the way I would combat this is I would want to see a new a new software kind of propped up, something that would show authorship or transformative use of said software, that you can, there's certainly instances wherein it has been open source software has been kind of used in a commercial project, but then translated into that specific use case. And that's what's going to help you demonstrate that it's your own IP as opposed to something that anyone else can use. Although there are other mechanisms around it. Definitely an interesting one. I'd love to dig into that more if we had more time.
Awesome. Perfect. Hopefully that answered your question. And this is actually a perfect last question to end on. This is from Florian. This is a very, it's a dire, very crucial, super duper important question. Super important. What is your favorite game?
Oh no! This is when everyone realizes I'm basic. I really loved the Witcher series for the longest time. That was my favorite game, and then Baldur's Gate 3 came out, and that became my new favorite game. I'm a TTRPG nerd, and I also love a solo experience, so anything that can give me fighting, magic, and a bit of romance is automatically the first on my list. But I've certainly played a lot of wonderful indie games recently that have kind of threatened that. It's so difficult. It's so difficult to take away the crown. So I hope it didn't disappoint with that.
Honestly, if that's what you call basic, I'm with everybody in the chat. I must be basic too. Because I'm all about, story engaging, driven RPGs and of that sort. So I guess I might be basic as well.
Yes,
basic yes.
Night.
Yes, of course. Jack, I am also hyped for the Witcher remake, even though I still need to get through the Witcher series because I haven't played the Witcher series yet. I know. I am missing out. I know. The backlog is backlogging. It is growing. But no, I definitely agree with you. I might, if you're interested, also Tess, I might slide some recommendations just in case if you want.
Oh yes, please.
If you want. Yes. But yeah. So I think that covers all of the questions that we have. Thank you so much again, Tess. Can we just give Tess one more quick round of applause? Because she is just way too amazing and she needs to know it and everyone needs to make sure they applaud for her.
Thank you.
No, this was absolutely amazing. Definitely a very engaging presentation. I definitely have not seen presentations like this before to be this engaged. So, in a long time, I should say. So, kudos to you for that. We're definitely going to be stealing or just politely borrowing some tactics, for sure. But thank you so much. And if you want to contact Tess, by the way, she is in this server as Inverlist. Or feel free to send her an email as well. You can also connect with her on LinkedIn, or send her a DM, as she just mentioned. So feel free to do all of the above. And yeah, if you want to connect with anybody else on the... Oh, you want to add something?
Wait, there's more. Yeah, I told you to go. I told you to go to my website, but I actually have that right of revenue sharing here. I'm just going to share it with you now. If you want to go to my website and give me your email for newsletter purposes, I don't have one yet, and I don't expect that I'm going to be spammy about it. But feel free to do it that way if you want to. As a special treat, though, for this being a Cave Bear exclusive PDF in chat, feel free to just download it and use it at your leisure.
Woo. Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Tess. And like I said, feel free to connect with them, send them an email, send them a message for any other questions that were not asked in time for this presentation. So feel free to do so. But with that wraps up the event for today. Rutuja, I'm not sure if you've already done so, but you can stop the recording now. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Have a great rest of your Friday or whatever time